I've been doing some heavy reflection of late, which is one of the reasons that you haven't heard me on this podcast in, well, a couple of weeks. Part of this thinking has come through an experience I had, I don't know, maybe 6 days ago, when I received an email from Eric Davis. Now, I've appeared on Eric Davis's podcast in 2013. To add the sense of this thing, I'm actually going to provide a little bit of audio of me taking over the conclusion of Eric Davis's podcast, just to get a sense of the whimsy that I used to display, or at least displayed with poor quality audio.
It's August 19th at Netflix. The doors open at 6:30 p.m. It's through the front foyer into the main theatre. The doors, unfortunately, will close at 7 p.m. promptly, so folks need to get in early at 6:30. But it's going to be Kevin, Larry Yeager, and myself rapping. We'll take audience questions. It could degenerate as this hour has done.
All right. Thanks, Tom and Kevin, for being on the show.
And part of this experience was getting Eric Davis, I think, to do a Conscious in the Cloud talk at Netflix. That never materialized. I've had probably 2 or 3 pieces of correspondence with Eric Davis since he went to the final Grateful Dead concert, the Fare Thee Well tour, and was in the crowd of the 50-odd thousand. So we both experienced the same concert, and I emailed him following just to say, hey, I was there too. However, he and I have not met. I've tried to get him down to Netflix for just a meal. I've tried to meet him when I'm up in San Francisco, but our paths have never crossed. He is doing a talk with my long-term old friend Douglas Rushkoff. Douglas and I haven't seen each other for about 8 years. We used to be very thick and fast friends, certainly when I lived in the Bay Area, 99 through to 2001. Douglas and I were pretty inseparable. I went and stayed with him on a couple of occasions. He came and stayed with me on a couple of occasions. We were really quite close friends through that period of time, but we've drifted apart for a variety of different reasons. Douglas Rushkoff's writing is antithetical to him as a human being, and I have a great frustration with some of his writing, although as I get older I'm more sympathetic to Mindvirus and to a lesser extent Siberia, but his later writing, and in particular his connection with the general narrative that if you're a thinking, clean-minded person, then the DNC is the only way to be. I'm not saying the GOP is the only way to be. I'm saying that let's be independent thinkers. These kind of narratives fell off. He got into a Trump-era funk, which stopped me from listening to his podcast. I think I've historically actually contributed audio to one of his podcasts as well. If I really wanted to find it, I'd go back and try to find that audio, but finding the Eric Davis audio was enough for this particular recording. There is an overarching emotion that I have when I interact with these folk, and that is that I provide an independent and critical narrative, which would be wonderful to be able to provide at the same level as these folk. The fact that Eric and Doug will be rapping for a recorded podcast and I am paying $20 plus the cost of a hotel in order to attend their talk and be in the audience and maybe shake both their hands at the conclusion of the talk, this strikes me as a little bit hollow, and I've been having this emotion through a variety of different factors. Another perspective, I have been looking at Facebook ads as a means of promoting my podcasts and been thoroughly frustrated with the false dichotomy. Facebook has 2 things. It has pages and it has groups. Pages are designed to be branded things that people like, and then they get to find branded information through the pages, and groups are about having conversations. So I will create groups. That's what I do. Model Rail Radio as an organic conversation is a group. It is not a page. And because it is not a page, I cannot create Facebook promotional ads for this thing because it is not a page. That is how ridiculous this thing is. So I need to create a page in order to link to my group, or create a page in order to link to my podcast. And as far as I'm concerned, that just indicates very clearly that Facebook ads are broken. Broken and not worthy of my time. So these 2 emotions, Douglas Rushkoff and Eric Davis speaking in San Francisco and me paying to go up and see them talk, and also a sense that Facebook ads are not a way to get people to my podcast. There's an additional footnote to this. Apple is now prototyping. It's in a beta phase, ladies and gentlemen. A podcasting analytical toolbox that requires, I think, iOS 11.2, perhaps, maybe even 0.3, which might explain some of the numbers. And through this, you get interesting statistics like how long people listen to your podcasts and the number of people and the number of locations. I use, what is it called? AW Stats, which is an old web server stats package to run mathematics associated with unique IP addresses, and then some fractional portion of that is actually a listener. And I have all these different methods to try to translate all the wide variety of download statistics that I have to think, well, this probably indicates that I'm speaking to 200 people here, 180 people there, and so on and so forth. What I've noticed through these statistics is that I'm gradually losing listeners to a majority of my podcasts, and I can chart why I'm losing listeners. Certainly what has happened with Attic Aficionados, there are going to be a group of listeners that drop off when one of the co-hosts change. That's understandable. But my general frustration is I don't have a mechanism to get people listening aside from going and appearing on other podcasts. And to this end, and I've been talking about this since 2016, maybe even 2015 in Stone Ape, I have decided to hire a PR person. Now, this is a direct contravention? No, not quite. It's something that's distinctly different than what I've done historically, and also it gives a great ability for me to start experimenting with things that I have never thought about doing previously. Literally, the second email from this PR person was, "Why aren't you getting sponsors for your podcasts?" Ladies and gentlemen, that was an interesting conversation to have, but I outlined the general points that I've made historically, in particular that sponsorship in its rawest, unadulterated form, particularly up front, produces podcasts which I think are barely listenable. I am listening to Atlanta Monster currently, which is a combination of How Stuff Works and another podcast. No, not even podcasters. I mean, they're not podcasters. Let's just put it out there. So you have bad quality audio plus music behind, things that are just going nowhere, like nonsensical directions, like talking to a guy's cellmate and the cellmate's parents, rather than actually talking about the guy who's accused. And the whole thing is very curious. I think it's designed to string people along for as many episodes as possible, packed with as many ads as possible. And in contrast to this, or maybe in direct comparison to exactly the same format, I'm listening to a podcast associated with Patty Hearst, which really, let's get this straight now, there's a CNN program, it's advertising the CNN program, and the CNN program is advertising a book. I think I got that right. So you get tertiary information through this podcast in a very curious fashion where they talk down to the listening audience, and it has really bad audio, and of course it's packed with ads. So this is the new normal associated with podcasts. You have people such as myself that produce not well thought out perhaps, but produce podcasts at least with reasonable audio, reasonable direction, no advertising, and try to get people raw ideas in a genuinely, well, I'd like to think at least introspective form. And in contrast to this, you have the whole sphere that is commercial podcasting now, which clearly has an audience, but only has an audience through mass saturation, and of course the fact that iTunes is willing to continue to roll out these podcasts. And obviously, if you've got a creative audience, and I should point out that the Atlanta Monster podcast appeared on all the news programs, obviously very good PR, etc. ad nauseum. So from this, I am thinking, well, if you can't beat them, don't join them in their specific way, but let's join them associated with having a genuinely smart person who's genuinely savvy about PR take on this effort and provide a narrative associated with a vast number of my works. When I say a vast number, there are at least 7 works that can be described as ongoing things that I'm creatively doing currently. Get this person on some kind of payroll and get them working towards growing an audience for my collective stuff. So this is very interesting in a discomfiture way. I maintain my comfort zone because I create my comfort zone. I create every aspect of these recordings. I edit them down to the minutiae. The amount of time that I spend creating podcasts is equally part content producing and then heavy editing. to make the quality of the audio something that I think is reasonable and worthy of putting out. But it also makes me think critically associated with the allegiances and the creations that I have done historically. There is a lot of meat in Stone Ape in this regard. And historically, there's a lot of meat in a number of my other collaborations. We've not yet talked about Biota, but certainly Attic Aficionados has come up periodically. And I think through having someone who is dedicated for a certain amount of time per month to think of creative solutions and create creative promotional mechanisms that maybe slowly but surely more people might actually start to consume or understand, or at least have exposure to the content that I put out. Now, I have a variety of whimsical ways of just apologizing for my lack of PR, and in particular for my lack of PR savviness. The notion of being someone who creates stuff is antithetical in many regards to someone who is actively promoting stuff, and I always look to my colleagues and friends that become academics, or even worse, become funding-driven scientists, so independent professional scientists that need to seek grants. What a horrible life to devote 60% of your time to actually writing stuff with a 1 in 10 chance that this thing will actually get funding. I mean, ideally, it improved to about 1 in 3, but it still indicates that you're spending an inordinate amount of time for stuff which isn't actually getting you to your desired goal. This has always been my concern with regards to PR. The tuning, the pitching, all this other kind of stuff. I'd much rather make content and see what sticks and what doesn't, and use that in a direct feedback loop to produce more content. That being said, I'm still very sensitive to experimentation. I've done a lot of experimentation, in particular with Facebook ads, back when they weren't such fascist things. So in this light, what I'm interested in doing is moving beyond my comfort zone, working through the justifications that I have for certain things, and then allowing for irony, deep irony that comes from the universe as a means of motivating change in these general directions. Will you be seeing podcasts from me sponsored by Ford Motor Company in the foreseeable future? Probably not. But what you might see in the medium term is actual media associated with the stuff that I do. And I think Model Rail Radio is a unique pinnacle in some regard associated with taking these ideas of community building to immense success. I'm not sure how I will introduce this to the Model Rail Radio audience, but I think it is something in stark contrast to these poorly recorded things with, music playing and ads every 5 minutes. Let's create something different. Let's create a counterbalance to this thing, and then show people that there is actual quality out there if they're willing to spend a little bit of time to look for it. Or even better, eliminate the time to look for it, and let's get media articles associated with doing this stuff. So in the short term, ideally, although the PR person hasn't really picked what she's going to do through this thing, it is going to be primarily associated with getting more listeners to my podcasts, including potentially this very recording, Long Funk. It's going to be a strange and long and tortured process, but I'm in it for the long term, and I'm actually interested in seeing which way this thing goes. I will leave with a slight footnote associated with the one success I've had associated with hiring someone historically to do exactly this task. And this is, I think, probably late 2003, early 2004. We're in the UK, literally on the street that I lived on. I hired a PR person who wrote a single press release that got me an article in IEEE Computer Graphics and Applications, and also an interview on BBC Radio 4. And I'm trying desperately to find the interview on BBC Radio 4. It was pretty bad, ladies and gentlemen. But if I find that audio, I will commit to putting it into the Long Funk audio archive so others can hear this train wreck of Tom age, I don't know, I was probably too old to be doing this thing the way I did it, being interviewed on BBC Radio 4. You've got to understand the northern-southern distinction. When I went into BBC Radio 4, I was in the northern studio in Manchester, and the people I was talking to were in the southern studio in London. And the southern studio in London miraculously actually had decent audio equipment. I was in a small booth and they hadn't even done a mic check on me when I went live, so there were audio problems from the get-go. They were sipping tea down in London, and I was given a little spit cup with water in it. Boy, times have changed. I'm now sitting here in luxury, in a podcasting studio, delivering audio out to you as perhaps, only Tom Barbalet can. So, let me know what you think associated with these various ideas. The Long Funk Facebook group, terribly, terribly neglected, associated with list of feedback. If I run it as a group, it's got to be used for discussion, discourse, and idea sharing. I'll leave that with you as I sit in my studio in San Jose. Surprisingly little AK-47 fire this evening.